The Valorian science vessel Gentle Dawn had been traveling through the Keth Nebula for 3 days when everything went wrong. The ship was old but reliable, carrying 347 Valorian scientists, engineers, and crew members on a routine research mission. They were studying the strange gases and ancient debris that floated in this part of space. Nobody expected any danger. The Keth Nebula was supposed to be quiet and empty. Captain Lyris Then stood on the bridge, watching the purple and blue clouds of gas drift past the viewing windows. She was tall for a Valorian, with silver feathers covering her head and neck, and large golden eyes that could see in almost complete darkness. Like all her people, she had hollow bones that made her light and fragile. Valorians had evolved on a small planet with weak gravity, and their bodies were built for floating and gliding, not for fighting or surviving harsh conditions. The asteroid came from nowhere. One moment the sensors showed empty space, and the next moment a massive rock slammed into the side of the ship. The impact threw Captain Then to the floor. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered and died, then came back in emergency red. She could hear her crew shouting, crying, praying to gods she had stopped believing in long ago. "Report," she called out, pulling herself up on shaking legs. Her navigation officer, a young male named Keth, was bleeding from a cut on his face. His feathers were pressed flat against his skull in fear. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, he said, his voice trembling. "Life support systems damaged. Engines offline. We are drifting." Captain Then felt cold fear spread through her chest, but she did not let it show on her face. Her crew needed her to be strong. She walked to the main console and looked at the damage reports. They were bad. They were very, very bad. The asteroid had torn through the ship like a claw through paper. 17 crew members had died instantly when their section was exposed to the vacuum of space. Another 30 were injured. The engines were destroyed beyond repair. Life support was failing slowly, like a dying animal taking its last breaths. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. The chief engineer, an old female named Prella, answered from across the bridge. 72 hours, Captain. Maybe less. The backup systems are working, but they were not designed for this level of damage. 3 days to live, floating in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by gas clouds that blocked most communication signals. Captain Then closed her eyes and thought about her family back home. She thought about her daughter, who had just started her studies at the academy. She thought about her mate, who had asked her not to take this mission, but thinking about death would not save her crew. She opened her eyes and straightened her spine. "Send a distress signal," she ordered. "All frequencies. Maximum power. Someone will hear us." The communications officer worked quickly, his thin fingers dancing over the controls. The Gentle Dawn began broadcasting its desperate message into the void. It was a simple message, transmitted in every language the Galactic Council used. "Help us. We are dying. Please come far away, on a station orbiting a peaceful planet." The message was received by the Galactic Council. The Council was the governing body of 12 different species who had agreed to work together for peace and prosperity. They had rules for everything. They had committees and subcommittees and endless meetings where representatives argued about small details while big problems were ignored. The Valorian distress call was brought before the Emergency Response Committee. 12 representatives sat in a circular room, each one a different shape and size. Some had scales, some had fur, some had skin that changed colors with their emotions. They all watched as the message played on the central screen. "This is Captain Lyris Then of the Valorian science vessel Gentle Dawn. We have suffered a catastrophic hull breach. 17 dead, many injured. Life support failing. We have approximately 72 hours. Our coordinates are attached. Please send help, please." The message ended. Silence filled the room. Finally, the Ryshian representative spoke. The Rishians were large, slow-moving creatures who valued caution above everything else. "The Keth Nebula is dangerous territory. It borders the hunting grounds of the Kareth." Everyone in the room shifted uncomfortably at that name. The Kareth were monsters. They were a predatory species that hunted other sentient beings for food and sport. They had powerful ships and no respect for council laws. Nobody wanted to fight them. A rescue mission would require military escort, another representative said. That means risking our ships and our soldiers. Alorians are a minor species, added a third voice. They have no military value, no strategic resources. What do we gain by saving them? Captain Then's face still hung frozen on the screen, her golden eyes full of desperate hope. But the representatives did not look at her. They looked at reports and numbers and calculations. The debate lasted 6 hours. Some representatives argued for sending help. Others argued against it. Most simply stayed quiet, waiting to see which way the wind would blow before choosing a side. In the end, the vote was 9-3 against intervention. The council would officially acknowledge the distress call. They would send a message expressing their deep concern and their sincere hopes for the Valorian crew's survival. But they would not send ships. They would not send soldiers. They would not risk anything. The Valorians were, in the cold language of bureaucracy, not a priority. Thousands of light years away, Captain Then received the council's response. She read it 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then she sat down heavily in her command chair and stared at nothing. "Captain?" Keth asked softly. "What did they say?" She did not answer. She could not find the words to explain that the galaxy had looked at her dying crew and decided they were not worth saving. But the council's message was not the only one traveling through space that day. The Gentle Dawn's original distress call had spread far and wide, bouncing off satellites and relay stations, reaching corners of the galaxy that the council had forgotten about. One of those corners was a small station at the edge of known space. It was called Terran Station Omega, and it belonged to a species that the galaxy did not take very seriously. They were called humans. They came from a planet called Earth, a world so dangerous and violent that most species could not understand how anything had survived there at all. The humans had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years. They were new, strange, and often confusing. They formed emotional attachments to other species with alarming speed. They kept other animals as companions. They voluntarily exposed themselves to danger for entertainment. They seemed to enjoy pain. Most species avoided them. The Kareth had never encountered them. The council considered them unimportant. This was a mistake. At Terran Station Omega, a young officer named Rodriguez was monitoring routine communications when the Valorian distress call came through. He listened to it once, then immediately sent it to his commanding officer. Commander Sarah Chen was eating dinner in her quarters when the message arrived. She put down her fork and read it carefully. Then she read the council's response. Then she stood up so fast that her chair fell over behind her. "Get me a line to Earth Defense Command," she said, her voice tight with anger. Now, something had changed in the galaxy that day. Something small had shifted, like a single pebble starting an avalanche. The Valorians did not know it yet. The council did not know it yet. Even the Kareth, who were already moving their ships toward the helpless Gentle Dawn, did not know it yet. But the humans knew. And the humans were coming. Commander Sarah Chen had been a soldier for 20 years. She had fought in 3 wars on Earth before humanity reached the stars. She had seen terrible things and done difficult things and learned to keep. Her emotions locked away where they could not interfere with her duty. But when she read the council's response to the Valorian distress call, something inside her broke loose. She stood in the communications room of Terran Station Omega, surrounded by officers and crew members who watched her with nervous eyes. Her Palaxian communications officer, a thin creature named Kethri, was explaining the situation in his careful, precise way. "The Galactic Council has determined that a rescue mission presents unacceptable risks," Kethri said. His skin changed from blue to gray, which meant he was uncomfortable. "The Keth Nebula borders Kareth territory. The Kareth have been aggressive lately. A military escort would be required, and the council does not wish to provoke a conflict over a minor species." Chen slammed her fist against the metal console. The bang echoed through the room. Kethri jumped backward, his eyes wide with fear. He had been working with humans for 2 years, but he still was not used to their habit of hitting things when they were upset. They're just going to let them die? Chen's voice was low and hard. 347 people are going to die because the Council doesn't want to risk a fight. The Valorians are not strategically important, Kethri explained carefully. They have no military, no valuable resources. The Council has calculated that the cost of intervention outweighs the benefit. Chen looked at him for a long moment. Kethri felt a chill run through his body. He had seen that look on human faces before. It usually came right before something violent happened. I don't care about the Council's calculations, Chen said quietly. Those are people. Living, thinking, feeling people. And they're calling for help. She turned to Rodriguez, who was still standing at his station. Get me a priority line to Earth Defense Command. Authorization code Chen 77 Alpha. Tell them we have a situation. The next few hours moved quickly. Chen spoke with Admiral Marcus Webb, the commander of the 7th Terran Rapid Response Fleet. Webb was an old soldier with gray hair and scars on his face from battles fought long ago. He listened to Chen's report without interrupting. When she finished, he was silent for a moment. The Council refused to help. He asked, Yes, sir. And the Kareth are probably already on their way to claim the survivors? That is our assessment, sir. Another pause. Then Webb smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found prey. Get your station ready to receive refugees, Commander. The 7th Fleet will handle the rest. Within 3 hours, the 7th Terran Rapid Response Fleet had mobilized. 4 destroyers, 2 carriers, and the flagship Unconquered Sun began their journey toward the Keth Nebula. The crews worked with practiced efficiency, loading weapons and supplies, running system checks, preparing for battle. The other species of the galaxy called humans Deathworlders, and they had good reasons for this name. Earth was a nightmare planet by galactic standards. Its gravity was crushing, strong enough to break the bones of most alien species. Its temperature swung between extremes that would kill a Valorian in minutes. Its atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a gas so corrosive that it had literally rusted the planet's surface red in ancient times, and the life forms that had evolved on Earth were survivors of billions of years of competition and predation. Every creature on Earth was either a killer or had learned to escape killers. The humans were both. They were pursuit predators, evolved to chase their prey across endless distances until it collapsed from exhaustion. They could survive injuries that would kill other species. They could eat almost anything. They could adapt to almost any environment. They healed from wounds that should have been fatal. They kept fighting long after any reasonable creature would have surrendered. But the strangest thing about humans, the thing that confused and frightened the other species most of all, was their capacity for bonding. Humans formed emotional attachments to anything and everything. They adopted animals as family members. They fell in love with people from other species. They would risk their lives for complete strangers simply because those strangers needed help. The Valorians had never met a human. They had no alliance with Earth. They had nothing to offer in return for rescue. But somehow, impossibly, the moment their distress call reached human ears, they became pack. They became family. They became ours. Admiral Webb gathered his fleet commanders for a briefing before they jumped to hyperspace. The room was full of men and women in uniform, their faces serious and ready. Here's the situation, Webb said, pointing to a holographic map of the Keth Nebula. 347 Valorian civilians are stranded here. Their ship is crippled. Life support is failing. They have maybe 60 hours left. The Galactic Council has refused to help because they're afraid of the Kareth. He paused and looked around the room. We are not afraid of the Kareth. A low rumble of agreement went through the assembled officers. The Kareth are predators, Webb continued. They hunt weak species. They attack ships that can't fight back. They have never faced an enemy that hits harder than they do. That changes today. He touched a control, and the map zoomed in on the Gentle Dawn's position. Our mission is simple. We get to that ship. We evacuate those people. And if the Kareth try to stop us, we show them what happens when you threaten someone under human protection. Captain James Morrison, commander of the destroyer Relentless, raised his hand. Sir, the Council won't be happy about this. We're entering contested space without authorization. If we engage the Kareth, there could be diplomatic consequences. Webb nodded slowly. You're right. There probably will be consequences. Politicians will complain. Diplomats will send angry messages. Someone might write a strongly worded letter. Smiled that predator's smile again. I can live with that. What I can't live with is letting 300 people die because we were too scared to help them. He looked at each of his commanders in turn. Any other questions? There were none. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, disappearing from normal space in flashes of blue light. Across the galaxy, sensors detected their departure. Reports were filed. Messages were sent. The Galactic Council began to worry. On the gentle dawn, Captain Lyris then sat in her command chair and watched her crew slowly dying. The cold was getting worse. The air was getting thin. Some of the injured had already passed away. Others were losing hope. She had not told them about the Council's refusal. She could not bear to see the last light die in their eyes. Instead, she told them that help was coming. She did not know if it was true. She simply knew that she could not let them give up. What she did not know was that her lie was about to become truth. She did not know that across the vast emptiness of space, ships full of strange, terrifying, wonderful creatures were racing toward her at impossible speed. She did not know that her distress call had reached the ears of beings who did not calculate the value of lives, who did not weigh costs and benefits, who simply heard someone crying for help and answered the humans were coming. And nothing in the galaxy was going to stop them. The Kareth, or Pack, arrived at the gentle dawn 16 hours before the human fleet. There were 7 ships in total, dark and angular, built for speed and violence. They moved through the purple clouds of the Keth Nebula, like sharks swimming through bloody water. Drawn by the scent of weakness and fear, War Chief Skethra stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Hunger. He was massive, even by Kareth's standards, standing 3 meters tall, with an exoskeleton as black as space itself. His mandibles clicked together in anticipation as he watched the crippled Valorian vessel grow larger on his view screen. The Kareth were hunters. They had been hunters for millions of years, evolving on a harsh world where only the strongest survived. They did not build things or create art or form alliances. They took what they wanted from those too weak to stop them. The galaxy feared them, and they liked it that way. Scan the vessel, Skethra ordered. His voice was a harsh clicking sound that his translator converted into words other species could understand. His sensor officer worked quickly. 329 life signs remaining. All Valorian. No weapons. No shields. They are completely helpless. Skethra made a sound of satisfaction. Valorians were not his favorite prey. Their hollow bones made them fragile, and their meat was thin and stringy. But they were better than nothing, and the Endless Hunger's food supplies were running low. Open a channel, he commanded. On the gentle dawn. Captain Lyris then was helping her medical officer treat the wounded when the communication alert sounded. She rushed to the bridge, her heart pounding with hope. Perhaps the Council had changed their minds. Perhaps help had finally come. When she saw the face on her view screen, her hope turned to ice. The Kareth war chief filled the screen, his multiple eyes glittering with hunger, his mandibles spreading in what might have been a smile. Behind him, she could see other Kareth moving in the shadows, their exoskeletons clicking and scraping. Valorian vessel, Skethra said. I am War Chief Skethra of the Kareth Dominion. Your ship is crippled. Your crew is dying. You have nothing to fight with and nowhere to run. Captain Then forced herself to stand straight, though her legs wanted to collapse beneath her. What do you want? I want your crew, Skethra replied simply. Surrender them to me for processing, and I will let you die quickly. Resist, and I will tear your ship apart piece by piece and take them anyway. Either way, they belong to me now. Processing. Captain Then knew what that word meant. The Kareth did not take prisoners. They took food. She thought about her crew. The young officers who had trusted her to lead them safely. The scientists who had only wanted to study the stars, the engineers who had families waiting for them back home. She thought about watching them dragged away to become meals for monsters. And then she thought about the other message she had received, the one that had come just hours ago, on a frequency the Kareth had not detected. The message from the humans. "Hold on," the message had said. "We are coming. 20 hours. Hold on. 20 hours. The humans would arrive in 20 hours. If she could delay the Kareth for just a little longer. "I refuse," she said, her voice steady, despite her fear. "My crew is not yours to take." Skethra tilted his massive head, genuinely confused. Prey did not refuse. Prey begged and cried and offered bargains. They did not simply say no. "Cannot stop me, little bird," he said slowly. "You have no weapons. No shields. You are already dying. Why make this harder than it needs to be?" "Because there are some things worse than death," Captain Then replied, "and I will not hand my people over to monsters." For a long moment, Skethra simply stared at her. Then he made that clicking laugh of his, a sound like bones breaking. Brave words. Foolish, but brave. "Very well, little captain. I will give you 1 hour to change your mind. After that, I will come and take what is mine." The screen went dark. Captain Then allowed herself to sag against her console for just a moment before straightening again. 1 hour, then 20 more. Could she hold them off for 21 hours? She did not know, but she was going to try. She turned to face her bridge crew. They were all watching her with wide, frightened eyes. They had heard everything. "Help is coming," she told them. "The humans are coming. We just need to survive until they get here." The next hours were a nightmare of cat and mouse. Captain Then used every trick she could think of to delay the inevitable. She negotiated. She stalled. She pretended to consider surrender, then changed her mind. She moved her crew to the most protected sections of the ship and sealed every door and hatch. Skethra grew impatient. He began firing warning shots, blasting holes in sections of the ship that were already abandoned. Each impact shook the gentle dawn like an earthquake, but the hull held. Barely. "You are only making this worse for yourself," the war chief growled through the communications channel. "When I board your ship, I will eat you last. I will make you watch your crew die one by one." Captain Then did not respond. She was too busy praying to gods she had stopped believing in, begging them to make the humans arrive faster, and then impossibly wonderfully. Her sensors detected new ships entering the nebula. For a terrible moment, she thought they were more Karath, but the signatures were wrong. These ships were different, larger, heavier, built in ways she had never seen before. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a hammer falling from the sky. 4 destroyers spread out in a protective formation. 2 carriers hung back, ready to launch fighters. And in the center, leading the charge, was the flagship Unconquered Sun, a massive vessel bristling with weapons. Admiral Marcus's Webb's voice cut through all frequencies. Reaching both the Gentle Dawn and the Kareth Warpack at the same time, his words were calm and clear, the voice of a man who was completely certain of himself. "The Kareth vessels. This is Admiral Marcus Webb of the Terran Defense Force. You will withdraw from this sector immediately. The Valorian crew is under our protection. This is not a negotiation." Silence fell across the nebula. Captain Then stared at her view screen, tears running down her feathered face. They had come. The humans had actually come. On the endless hunger, War Chief Skethra studied the human ships with growing interest. He had heard stories about these creatures, these Deathworlders, from a heavy-gravity planet. They were supposed to be dangerous, but he saw only 7 ships facing his 7. They were evenly matched in numbers. "Humans," he replied, clicking his mandibles in amusement. "I have heard stories about your kind. Small, soft creatures from a brutal world. You are far from your territory, little predators. Go home. This prey is ours." "Last warning," Webb said simply. Skethra considered for a moment. He could retreat. He could find easier prey elsewhere. But he was war chief of the Endless Hunger, and he had never run from a fight in his life. Besides, he was curious. He wanted to see what these famous Deathworlders could do. "Fire," he ordered. 7 Kareth ships opened fire on the human fleet. Plasma bolts and missiles streaked across the nebula, lighting up the gas clouds with brilliant explosions. What happened next would be studied by military strategists for generations. The human ships did not behave like any vessels the Kareth had ever fought. They did not maintain formation. They did not fall back when hit. They did not follow any pattern that made sense. Instead, they scattered, accelerated, and began hunting. The destroyer Relentless took 3 direct hits to its forward section and kept coming. The carrier Prometheus launched fighters that swarmed the Kareth ships like angry insects. And the Unconquered Sun, flagship of the 7th Fleet, began moving directly toward the Endless Hunger with terrifying speed. Skethra watched in disbelief as his fleet began to fall apart. His ships were faster and more maneuverable, but the humans absorbed punishment that should have destroyed them and kept fighting. They were relentless. They were fearless. They were everything the stories had said and more. "What are these creatures?" he whispered, watching another of his ships explode under concentrated human fire. He was about to find out. The battle raged through the Keth Nebula like a storm of fire and steel. Explosions lit up the purple gas clouds. Ships twisted and turned, hunting each other through the cosmic fog. The sound of weapons fire could not travel through space. But inside each vessel, crews shouted orders and warnings and prayers. The Unconquered Sun took hit after hit. 11 direct impacts struck its hull, tearing through armor and destroying systems. Any normal ship would have fallen back. Any reasonable commander would have retreated to a safe distance. But Admiral Webb was not a reasonable commander, and humans were not a reasonable species. "Maintain course," Webb ordered calmly, even as another explosion shook his bridge. "Get us alongside the Endless Hunger." His helmsman obeyed without question. The Unconquered Sun accelerated toward the Kareth flagship, closing the distance despite the withering fire. Warchief Skethra watched this insane approach with growing horror. "They're going to ram us," his tactical officer reported, voice rising with panic. "That's impossible," Skethra said. "No one would sacrifice their ship for the impact," cut off his words. The Unconquered Sun struck the Endless Hunger at an angle, not hard enough to destroy either ship, but hard enough to lock them together. Metal screamed as hulls scraped against each other. Both vessels shuddered and groaned, and then the boarding parties came. Humans and heavy armor poured through the breaches in the Endless Hunger's hull. They carried weapons that fired projectiles at incredible speeds, punching through Kareth exoskeletons like paper. They moved in coordinated groups, covering each other, advancing relentlessly. Skethra had thought he knew what combat looked like. He had fought dozens of species across the galaxy. None of them had prepared him for this. The humans were not just dangerous. They were terrifying. They smiled when they fought. They shouted challenges and taunts. One human, bleeding from a wound that would have killed any Kareth, kept fighting for another 10 minutes before finally collapsing. Another human picked up a fallen comrade and carried her to safety while still firing his weapon with his free hand. These were not normal predators. These were monsters. While the main battle consumed the attention of both fleets, a single Terran medical frigate slipped away from the chaos. The Mercy's hand was small and fast and painted with the universal symbol for medical assistance. Its mission was simple: reach the Gentle Dawn and evacuate the survivors. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka led the rescue team. She was a small woman with black hair and dark eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her team consisted of 12 humans in environmental suits, carrying medical supplies, emergency equipment, and that strange thing that humans called hope. The Mercy's hand docked with the Gentle Dawn carefully. Matching the crippled vessel's slow drift, the boarding tunnel extended and sealed. Tanaka checked her suit's readings one more time, then opened the hatch. The inside of the Valorian ship was a nightmare. The air was thin and cold. Emergency lights flickered weakly. The smell of fear and death hung everywhere. Bodies lay in the corridors. Valorians who had succumbed to their injuries or simply given up. Fan out, Tanaka ordered. Find survivors. Prioritize the wounded. Her team moved quickly and efficiently. They had trained for this kind of situation. They knew how to handle fragile species, how to provide emergency care, how to carry injured beings without causing further harm. Within minutes, they had located the first group of survivors, huddled in a cargo bay. The Valorians looked up at the approaching humans with expressions of pure terror. They had never seen a human before. All they saw were large, powerful creatures in bulky suits. Moving with predatory confidence through their dying ship, Tanaka immediately recognized the problem. She raised her hands, showing they were empty, and spoke through her suit's translator. "We are friends. We have come to help you. Please do not be afraid." An elderly Valorian male slowly rose to his feet. His feathers were dull with stress and malnutrition. His eyes were red from crying, but there was still a spark of defiance in his voice. "The humans," he asked, "you are the ones who answered our call." "Yes, we're here to take you somewhere safe." For a long moment, the old Valorian simply stared at her. Then, to Tanaka's surprise, he began to cry. "They came," he whispered, tears running down his feathered face. They actually came. The evacuation took 4 hours. Tanaka's team worked without rest, moving through the broken ship section by section, finding survivors wherever they were hiding. Some Valorians could walk with assistance. Others had to be carried on stretchers. Many were in critical condition, barely alive, kept breathing only by emergency medical care. The worst part was the bodies. There were so many bodies. Valorians who had died from their injuries, from the cold, from simple despair. Tanaka made sure her team noted each one, recorded their locations, promised to return for them later. Even the dead deserved to go home. Captain Lyris, then, was one of the last to leave her ship. She had refused to abandon her post until every surviving crew member was safely aboard the Mercy's Hand. When Tanaka found her on the bridge, she was barely conscious, her hollow bones aching from the strain, her body shutting down from cold and exhaustion. "Captain Then," Tanaka said gently, "it's time to go." Lyris looked up at the human standing over her. Through the faceplate of Tanaka's helmet, she could see a small, round face with tired eyes and a kind smile. This was the species that had crossed the galaxy to save her crew. This was what a Deathworlder looked like. "Why?" Lyris whispered. "Why did you come?" "The Council abandoned us. We are nothing to you. We have nothing to offer." Tanaka paused. She looked at this fragile, brave creature who had held her ship together through impossible circumstances, who had faced monsters and refused to surrender, who had given her crew hope when there was no reason to hope. Then Tanaka did something that confused every scientist who later studied the footage. She knelt down beside Captain Then and gently took her delicate feathered hand in her own armored glove. She held it carefully, so carefully, knowing how easily those hollow bones could break. "Because you called for help," Tanaka said simply. "That's enough. That's always enough." Lyris felt something warm and strange spreading through her chest. Later, she would learn that humans called this feeling being part of the pack. She would learn that humans had a nearly unlimited capacity for bonding with others, for considering strangers as family, for fighting and dying for people they had never met. But in that moment, all she knew was that she was not alone anymore. Someone had heard her cry for help and answered. Someone had thought she was worth saving. "Thank you," she whispered. "You can thank me when we get you somewhere warm," Tanaka replied. "Now let's go." Outside, the battle was ending. The Kareth fleet, reduced from 7 ships to 3, was retreating into the nebula. Warchief Skethra had escaped, barely, his flagship crippled and his pride shattered. He would spend the rest of his life telling anyone who would listen about the day he fought the Deathworlders. "Don't go to human space," he would say, his voice haunted by memory. "Don't hunt things under their protection. They are not prey. They are predators, pretending to be civilized. And when you threaten something they care about, the pretense falls away." The Mercy's hand detached from the gentle dawn and made its way back to the fleet. In its cargo holds, 341 Valorian survivors sat wrapped in thermal blankets, breathing clean air, wondering if they were dreaming. Captain Lyris Then sat in the medical bay, letting human doctors treat her injuries with gentle hands. Through the window, she could see the unconquered sun floating nearby, battered and scarred, but unbowed. "We saved them," she heard someone say. "We saved them all." Not all, she thought. 17 had died in the initial collision, 6 more during the long wait. 23 of her crew would never see home again, but 341 were alive. 341 had been saved by strangers who asked nothing in return in her entire life. Captain Lyris Then had never witnessed anything so beautiful. The Terran fleet returned home as heroes. But the galaxy did not immediately see them that way. The Galactic Council was furious. Representatives who had voted to abandon the Valorians now stood in the Grand Assembly Hall and demanded answers. How dare the humans enter contested space without permission? How dare they engage a sovereign species in combat? How dare they ignore the Council's decision and act on their own? Admiral Marcus Webb stood before the assembly, his uniform still stained with the dust and smoke of battle. He listened to their complaints with a patient expression. He waited until they finished shouting. Then he spoke. "You ask why we did what we did," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The answer is simple. 347 people were dying. They called for help. You refused to answer. We did not." The Narration representative slammed his massive fist against his podium. "You have violated 17 diplomatic protocols. You have started a conflict with the Kareth Dominion. The consequences could be catastrophic." "The only catastrophe," Webb replied, "would have been letting innocent people die because it was politically convenient." The argument continued for hours. Diplomats threatened and complained and predicted disaster. But something strange was happening outside the assembly hall. Something the Council had not expected. The survivors were talking, Captain. Lyris then gave her first interview from a hospital bed on Terran Station Omega. She was still weak, still recovering from her ordeal, but her voice was strong as she described what had happened. "The Council told us to die quietly," she said, her golden eyes bright with emotion. "They calculated our value and decided we were not worth saving. They sent us a message full of polite words and empty sympathy while our air ran out and our people froze to death." She paused, gathering herself. And then the humans came. They did not calculate. They did not debate. They did not ask what we could offer in return. They simply heard that we needed help and came as fast as they could. They fought monsters for us. They bled for us. They treated our wounds and held our hands and told us everything would be all right. The interview spread across every communication network in the galaxy. Billions of beings watched Captain Then describe her rescue. Billions more saw the footage that the Mercy's hand had recorded. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka kneeling beside the dying captain, holding her fragile hand with infinite gentleness. That image became famous. Artists painted it. Poets wrote about it. It became a symbol of something that many species had forgotten existed. Compassion without calculation, kindness without conditions. The Valorian government contacted Earth within a week. They wanted to establish formal diplomatic relations. They wanted to discuss a protection alliance. They wanted more than anything to say thank you. 3 other minor species followed within a month. They were small civilizations, unimportant by Council standards, the kind of people who lived in fear of larger predators. They had watched the rescue of the Gentle Dawn with amazed eyes, and they had all asked themselves the same question. What if we were in trouble? Who would come for us? The Council had given them their answer. The humans had given them a different one. Commander Sarah Chen, who had started everything by refusing to accept the Council's decision, was promoted and given permanent command of Terran Station Omega. The station was expanded, upgraded, and equipped with better communication systems. It became the first point of contact for species seeking human assistance, a journalist asked her what message she wanted to send to the galaxy. Chen thought about the question for a long moment. She thought about Captain Then's desperate distress call. She thought about Admiral Webb's fleet charging into battle. She thought about Lieutenant Commander Tanaka's gentle hands. "It's simple," she finally said. "If you're in trouble and you call for help, we'll come. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what it costs. You call, we come." That's what humans do. Her words spread even faster than Captain Then's interview. Species who had never heard of Earth suddenly knew about the humans. Species who had dismissed them as unimportant savages suddenly looked at them with new eyes. The Galactic Council tried to maintain its position. Representatives gave speeches about proper procedures and diplomatic channels. They warned that human intervention would destabilize the balance of power. They predicted that the Kareth would seek revenge, but their words rang hollow now. Everyone had seen what the Council did when people needed help. Everyone had seen what the humans did. The comparison was not flattering. Slowly, things began to change. Other species started asking questions. Why did the Council abandon the Valorians? Why did they refuse to help? Who else had they abandoned? How many other distress calls had been ignored because the victims were not strategically important? The Council did not have good answers to these questions. They had rules and procedures and calculations, but they did not have the one thing that the humans had demonstrated: the simple willingness to help. Those in need, the Kareth did not seek revenge. War Chief Skethra and his surviving crew told everyone what had happened. They described the battle in horrified detail. The humans who kept fighting after being wounded, who rammed their ships into enemy vessels, who boarded the endless hunger and fought hand-to-hand with creatures twice their size. They are Deathworlders, Skethra repeated to anyone who would listen. Real Deathworlders. Their planet forged them in fire and blood. They are not prey. They will never be prey. And they protect those they consider pack with a ferocity that makes us look tame. The Kareth did not attack human ships or human allies again. Other predatory species heard the stories and made the same decision. It was not worth the cost. Years passed. The galaxy continued to change. More species joined the informal network of civilizations that looked to humanity for protection. They were not a formal alliance, just a loose collection of beings who knew that if they were ever in trouble, they could call Earth and someone would answer. Captain Lyris then returned to space eventually. She commanded a new ship, the Gentle Dawn, too, crewed by both Valorians and humans. The mixed crew became a model for interspecies cooperation. Other ships followed their example. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka kept serving on rescue missions. She saved hundreds more lives over the years, always with the same gentle efficiency, always treating the rescued with dignity and kindness. When she finally retired, she wrote a book about her experiences. It became required reading at medical academies across the galaxy. Admiral Marcus Webb continued commanding fleets until his age caught up with him. At his retirement ceremony, representatives from a dozen different species came to honor him. Captain Lyris then, now an admiral herself, gave the main speech. "This man crossed the stars to save strangers," she said. "He risked his career, his ship, and his life for people he had never met. When the galaxy told him that we were not worth saving, he answered with actions instead of words. He showed us what courage really means." She paused. Looking at the old admiral with eyes full of gratitude, he showed us what humanity really means. In the audience, humans and Valorians and dozens of other species stood together, united by something that could not be measured or calculated. They had learned something important in the years since the rescue of the Gentle Dawn. They had learned that the universe was cold and vast and often cruel, but it did not have to stay that way. Because somewhere out there, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary star, there lived a species that refused to let people suffer alone. A species that heard distress calls and answered them. A species that believed with all their stubborn hearts that everyone deserved a chance to be saved. And for the first time in a very long time, the galaxy had something that all the Council's rules and procedures could never provide. Hope. The stars were a little less dark now. The void was a little less empty. And anyone in trouble knew that they could send a message into the darkness, and someone, somewhere would hear it. Someone would come. That was what humans did, and that made all the difference.